good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is, as you can see, titled Is Reactive Recruiting or Hiring Costing You and Your Business? Thank you very much for attending. A few little housekeeping bits and bobs before we crack on. First of all, just to let you know that this is a condensed 30-minute webinar for anyone who's not been on our webinars before. And that means that unfortunately we can't stop during the webinar to take questions. However, as normal, I'm ably assisted today by my colleague Daniel Chatman Dan. Now Dan will man the chat as his nickname suggests, and if you do have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and if we can't answer them during the course of the webinar, then of course we're happy to give you a call and chat offline. And just on the subject of Dan, I have a little bit of bad news, unfortunately for us. Daniel will, well, actually this is going to be Dan's last webinar with Plus One. Daniel's decided to cross the 7th seal and move into internal recruitment. So he's going to actually be moving on in a couple of weeks' time. So Dan, would you like to say a few a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. No problem. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, today. As Stuart's alluded to, I will be manning the chat. I'll put a quick message in there. So any questions, feel free to write them down, and we'll come back and circle them back to the end. But thank you for attending. I'm sure you'll find the information in the webinar useful.
Thank you very much, Dan. What are we going to be doing without your dulcet tones? I'm going to have to be following my own advice and recruit someone to take your place, won't I? Okay, fine. Let's crack on because that 30 minutes goes incredibly quickly. So hopefully you'll see the slideshow. And again, if anyone's, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. We are going to be recording this webinar like we always do. And later on today or tomorrow, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. Please don't worry, we anonymize everybody. So even if you are brave enough to show your faces on camera, we blank them out for the video. So without any further ado, let's crack on. So this is what we're going to be covering today, really talking about what is reactive hiring and equally why it might be costing your business money and of course talent. And most importantly, what could you do to change that? And what are the benefits and some practical steps that you could put into play just after watching this webinar today. So a little bit about what's the landscape like right now. Well, as those of you that follow the news quite keenly, I think it was the EMF that announced only yesterday, the European Monetary Fund, that the UK economy growth prospects for this year have again been downgraded. So we went from the lofty heights of 1.3% growth predicted for this year to around 0.8%, which apparently makes us the slowest growth country in the G7 due to various political factors we won't get into today. But it's a really tough market, and I'm sure there are many businesses that aren't experiencing some form of difficulty economically. And of course, you know, this does impact when it comes to not only retaining your staff, but also when you're planning to hire. As you can see from the slideshow, we know that unemployment has ticked up a little bit nationally over the past 12 months. It's sitting around about 5.2, 5.3%, which is a 10-year high, but Oxfordshire, Warwickshire, so this sort of area of the country, as you can see, still relatively low, 2.4%. So still really bucking the national average, which of course means that there's still issues with hiring skilled staff for most positions, especially in areas like technical recruitment, professional services, and so on. And I'm sure you found that still in your own businesses. It also has the double whammy effect of candidates becoming a little bit more reluctant to move. You know, it's a little bit like, if you can imagine, if there's some bad news out there, not only do businesses slow down their hiring or their investments, candidates sort of pull up the duvet a little bit more and wait for calmer waters before potentially moving. So it sort of has all these knock-on effects, but that's really kind of where we're sat at the moment. So what is reactive hiring? Well, as the title suggests, it's basically not starting your hiring until there is a perceived need. And that could simply be someone knocking on your door. Hey boss, can I have a chat at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? And yeah, we can probably take a couple of guesses as to what that chat's going to be involving. After which you then reach out for the job description, perhaps start advertising for a position to replace that person, or contact third-party agencies like ourselves to help recruit. Now, as it says on the slide, most employers operate in this way. Okay, so if you're sat there thinking, oh, yeah, that's what we do, what's wrong with that? You're absolutely not alone. I would say at least 80% of employers still operate in that way. And there are reasons for that, and we'll come on to that. But equally, what we're here today to talk about is how you can apply a little bit more of a strategic thought process into your hiring, and actually what the added benefits of those processes would be. So what's wrong with it? Well, based on various statistics that we have access to, if you think about this kind of makes sense. If you wait and reactively hire, you're picking a small window out of an annual calendar where you're dipping into the employment market, you're dipping into the candidate pool, for want of a better word. So your actual chances of finding the ideal candidate for your position, as you can see from the slideshow, is actually under 40%. It really is a bit of a lucky dip situation. And those of you that advertise positions directly and are responsible for receiving CVs or maybe reaching out to candidates will know, if you post a job advert today, over the next few days, you will have a proper licorice all sorts of candidates apply for those roles. Now, you might get lucky, you might strike oil relatively quickly and get the ideal candidate, but you're probably not going to have a wide selection unless it's a role where there is a particularly high demand from candidates right now. And that, as I said, that selection will be pretty checkered, from all different walks of life. So there's reasons why that is obviously a problem. It does reduce your percentage chances of finding the ideal candidate at that moment in time. Equally, there's other operational reasons, as I mentioned on this slide. So, have you had the proper time to look internally within the business to decide, do we actually need the like-for-like replacement again? Do we reach for the same job description that we used a year, 18 months ago? What has changed within the business in that time? Is it, different trading situations? Have we integrated some new software which might potentially automate some of the processes that this person might have done? And even, even looking at the job description, is it still valid? Do we need to actually put those job descriptions back in front of line managers to get their thoughts as to whether or not the job role is still what we thought it was 2 years ago? So we actually do a separate webinar on job descriptions, actually. So if anyone's interested in that, just pop yes please in the chat, and either Dan or myself can pop you a link to that video where we talk about, reviewing and building job descriptions. But as I says, it's worth thinking about all of the above before you press the green button to go to hire. So as we've mentioned, some hidden costs, a lack of ideal candidates. That means that, if less than 40% of the candidate market is available to you in that window, that means you've got 65 to 70% chance of hiring the wrong person. Not necessarily making a terrible hiring choice, but you might not be getting the very best person that you could have got had you put a slightly more strategic process in place. Your business may have changed. It's also worth looking at reasons why people have left. So we mentioned later on about exit interviews, but if you're proactively gaining feedback as to why people are leaving, and you know, whether there's a theme, you could get some immediate cost benefits there by simply addressing some of those problems, if you can. But ultimately, as the slide shows, it's a higher chance of hiring the wrong person. And of course, you've got all the knock-on costs of doing so. So let's talk a little bit about strategic hiring and what does this mean? So as we sort of put here, simply put, you are looking to try and make some predictions on which roles and where in the business your recruitment is likely to take place. Now, thinking about it, we always look at doing a review of where your recruitment has been within the business over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years. Probably not worth going back too much further than that, just because the economic landscape has been so choppy, certainly since post-COVID anyway, you know, if you think about it. But, you know, a good 3-year review should give you some indication as to where the typical roles do come up within the business, and might even give you some patterns in terms of, you know, 2 or 3 positions come up in that department. You know, we always seem to be hemorrhaging staff in that department, and so on and so on. You could also include in here, in fact, you should include in here any planned hires. So this is not obviously your backfilling. We're talking about strategic hires. So for example, if you were thinking of upping your marketing game this year, and you want to bring someone in to do your marketing for your business, how does that person sit in the business? When do we think we're going to want to bring that person in? So which quarter of the year are we hoping to bring that person in? And so on and so on. And we can sort of build that into an overarching 12-month rolling plan. So, and again, you know, it doesn't have to be growth. You know, if we think about, as it says here, you know, CIPD as of February this year quoted that 35%, or sorry, what I should say is that staff turnover in the UK is sitting around about 35% as it is today. Now you might be sat there thinking, oh my God, you know, that's like a third of my workforce. Well, yeah, apparently so. And certainly we do work with some companies that do recruit on a very, very regular basis. And also, you know, we see stats like this on LinkedIn all the time. You know, apparently only 10% of UK employees are properly engaged at any one point in time, which means, you know, potentially 90% of your workforce today is either thinking about leaving, has already started the process of applying for jobs, or is potentially close to leaving in the next 12 months. So quite a horrifying and scary statistic for most businesses, I'm sure you'd agree. But yeah, you know, again, there's a lot of activity on job boards such as LinkedIn, and that would, of course, you know, suggest to back that up. So we know with some predictability that at some point over the next year, you are going to need to recruit, no matter the size of your business. It's just a case of where is it going to happen? How can we plan for it? When do we need to hire? And what do we need to do it properly? So how do we plan? Okay, so thinking about sort of 12 to 18 month timescale. So if you drew a line in the sand and said, right, from the 1st of April to the 1st of April, or sorry, 30th of March next year, where do we see our hiring patterns? Okay, what are we likely to want to recruit for? And even as I said here, in a smaller business, 30 headcount, you're probably going to be looking at around, I would say, sort of 8 to 12 vacancies over the course of that time. So it's significant even in smaller businesses. I mentioned exit interviews. So if you're not doing those, they're well worth doing. I would always recommend, if possible, if you don't have an internal HR person, maybe try and get an external HR consultant to do these for you. Very, very difficult for people to do it with their direct line manager, of course, or even a director, because of course, you know, in those situations, they'll be far more guarded about perhaps what they say and maybe their true reasons for leaving, especially if there is some form of complaint or grievance that, you know, meant that they decided to leave. But again, little cost saving ideas. There could be some things there, you know, such as maybe people perceive a lack of progression or a lack of training opportunities within the business, And maybe some of those are things that could be addressed and actually help to reduce your staff turnover. And again, overall, reduce how much you're paying for recruitment and retention. So a little bit of prep. We don't just go straight to market and put jobs on job boards and adverts in windows and, brief agencies. Like I said a couple of slides ago, what you could really do with doing is having a proper think about, okay, we've got our 12-month based on the last couple of years. We're fairly sure we're going to need to recruit in X, Y, Z positions in the business. And maybe we're thinking of bringing in a new hire or a new position or two. Okay, perfect. But now what do we do? Do we just put adverts out? Do we just, ring agencies like normal? To do this well, you need to build what we would call an employer brand. Okay, now a lot of businesses have careers pages on their websites. That's great, that's fine. Some of them are fairly basic, just maybe a one-pager with perhaps a couple of job vacancies on. They are criminally out of date most of the time. Often you'll see job vacancies on there that were, posted a year ago. Perhaps just hasn't been given any love in recent times. But aside from that, this would be a good time to have a good look at your careers page. So if you imagine you're shopping for jobs and you're having a look around and you're directed to a careers page of a company, what is that really saying to the outside world about your business? Is it up to date? So does it have your current mission statement on it? Is there a bit of a profile about, what the business is looking to do over the next, say, 3 to 5 years? Does it tell a bit of a story about where the business has come from? So you can kind of link it to an About Us page or a history page or whatever. But there are some really cool things you can do with this. So I mentioned video in the slide here. We've seen some great examples of video content that businesses have put on their careers page. Doesn't have to be that technical or even that expensive to produce. It could be, a brief interview, sort of 1 minute, 30 seconds to 1 minute interview with a couple of members of staff about why it's great to work in your company. Always tend to use people that are either long-standing or in senior management roles because they're less likely to disappear just after you've filmed the video. Or if you've got particularly, great stories within the business about maybe someone that joined in a very junior position, has been with the company 10 years, has worked their way through the ranks and is a real advocate of the company, what a great person to have as your poster person for the business. So you can get really creative with this, but it doesn't need to be, Steven Spielberg. It just needs to tell a nice story that would be attractive to somebody who's looking at your business for the first time. It's also a great opportunity to showcase, what else you do outside of work. So if you do things like, I don't know, away days or team days, even things like, Macmillan coffee mornings or charity work or anything like that, that again showcases how you like to work with your people, then it's a great platform to showcase that. So, in most circumstances, that shouldn't take too long to bring up to date. And of course, you can link any vacancies that you're currently hiring for within that. And of course, make sure people know how to contact you, email addresses, contact numbers, names, that sort of thing. We'd also recommend, as I said here, maybe like a one-page, what we call an EVP, which is employer value proposition. And again, that's something that you can email out to prospective candidates, perhaps after an initial chat on the phone, to again point them in the direction of your careers page, or even if you don't have a careers page, like a one-page PDF that says, hey, this is why we're great to work for. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what you do next. So assuming you've got your candidate page looking nice, your careers page looking nice, you've got an EVP, all your ducks are in a row, you know which roles you're going to be recruiting for, perhaps over the next 12 to 18 months. What we're going to do now is start putting together what's called a candidate pool. And it's very, very simple. As the definition here, is a proactive process of sourcing, engaging, and maintaining your own database of qualified potential candidates for future job openings. Because, you know, we're not Nostradamus, we don't know exactly when jobs are going to come up. I mean, you may know that in a few months' time, someone in that team might be retiring or relocating, or, of course, you know, the jungle drums might beat and you might get a bit of information down the chain. But we're talking about trying to make predictions of likely recruitment. But what we need to do is start building a candidate pool so that when the time approaches that you need to go to market, you've got, sorry, you've got your, think of it like a subs bench on the side of a football pitch. If one of your players comes off injured, you've got a ready-made replacement on the sidelines that you can just very, very quickly bring into play. And that's metaphorically what we're sort of building here when we're talking about candidate pooling. So how do we do this? Now, you can obviously do this yourselves, of course. That's why we're here today. You can speak with your hiring partners, recruitment companies, whoever you work with. But we would always advise, in advance of any hiring, try and start at least 2 to 3 months ahead of when you think your next hire will be. Quite simply, the reason for that is, again, going back to our early window when we talked about the 40% chance of hiring at a specific moment. If you put a 2 to 3 month lag on that, you've got far more time to build up your candidate pool for candidates to notice your adverts, because that's the other thing. You've got to hope they notice your adverts at the specific time that they are looking for a job. And also, you know, allow time for a proper interview process, at least 2 stages, potential notice periods of between 1 and 3 months. So again, we're thinking further down the tracks. Throughout all of this, what we're advocating is maintaining a constant low-level advertising and recruitment process. Okay, so what we're saying is start advertising, but keep the advert running even when you're not recruiting specifically at that moment. Okay, because as I said, what we're doing is we're building a candidate pool, and that ideal candidate might not be available today, but they might be available in 2 months' time, and then they might see your advert. Then you might have a chat with them and you would add them as a likely candidate in your pool. So what you're doing is you're starting to collect and collate your own spreadsheet or database, however you want to store the details of potential candidates. So what do you do when you got them? Well, that's a very good question. And, you know, obviously somebody has to manage that candidate pool, because of course, you know, you can have a nice chat with someone today, doesn't mean they're still going to be on the job market in 3 or 4 or 6 months' time. So again, we're trying to create something that's relatively low maintenance, because we appreciate you might not have an internal recruitment team or people that would do this all the time for you. So we'd suggest having an initial chat with the candidates that look relevant on paper. Obviously, if you get applications for people that are unsuitable, please just let them know. Again, for those of you that use LinkedIn regularly, you'll see there's just so much noise on LinkedIn from candidates complaining that they just never hear back from recruiters or hirers. And if we're thinking about building your employer brand, what sort of messaging do we want to put out there? Well, I'm sure you all want to tell the world that you're great to work for, you have fantastic professional working practices, and simply demonstrating good communication really just backs that up. A good practice here is to just pop people who are engaged and interested onto some sort of newsletter or some sort of email trail, so that maybe every, you know, once a month they're getting a newsletter about what's going on in your business. And again, it just maintains a gentle, low-level engagement. They can always unsubscribe, of course, but at least they're getting something from you. And of course, within that newsletter, you can pop details about current vacancies and the things that you're recruiting in other areas of the business as well. So once you've done all of this, what you should do, or what you should start to be building, is a good pool of people that you've already spoken to, that are already engaged with your business, that have already shown an interest in your company, and when the time is right to hire, are ready to pluck from your candidate pool, have a more detailed conversation or bring in for a formal interview. But by that point, they've probably over 50% decided that you are a business that they would like to work for. So a lot of the hard work is done. What you're doing is then cementing the relationship, talking about the specific job vacancy, and hopefully shaking hands on an offer in a week or two's time. Okay, so that all sounds very simple, of course. I'm sure there's a few kind of hurdles to jump through, but essentially that's what we're talking about when we're talking about strategic hiring. Okay, a few do's and don'ts. We've got a couple of minutes left. So do please make sure that any candidate data you're receiving is stored as per UK data protection laws. If you use a CRM, customer relationship management software, or ideally some sort of HR software where there is a recruitment plugin or recruitment portal, that's ideal because it will naturally store candidates' data, CVs, and any other information. And then it's a very easy process to push that information into your actual personnel files once they're onboarded. So that would be a recommendation. You can get platforms, even if you're not using one, you can get platforms like Breathe HR relatively cheaply, and we're talking 20 to 50 pounds a month or whatever. So they're not expensive to get. As we said, do take time to put some employer branding materials together or update your careers page with all the latest content. Again, maybe if you've got someone in marketing that can do that, or if it's a smaller business, a director that's got access to your CMS can just update those for you. Again, that's invaluable. And please, as I said a couple of slides ago, don't forget to maintain some form of contact with people once you've got their details. It's very easy once you've received candidates' details to forget about who they are. And of course, we're talking about building your employer brand. It'd be quite difficult to reach out to people 6 to 9 months after you first spoke to them to say, hey, remember us? We're that company you might have spoke to a year ago. And yeah, they're probably long gone by that point and really not interested because you never got back to them. Okay, so next steps. So as we said, you can build your employer brand, execute a 12-month plan. Now, of course, we can help you with this. We do have a specific product that can help with this, which is our 12 months rolling subscription plan. What that enables you to do is to have a very cost-effective recruitment program over the space of a year, which you can scale up or scale down depending on the number of vacancies you plan to hire. So if you would like further information on that, or you'd just like to have a bit of a sense check with myself or one of the team about how you can set a strategic hiring process in motion, whether you use us or not, then please, by all means, feel free to contact me and you can book a no obligation call or meeting and we can have a chat about that. Okay, so what have we got coming up next? Well, always a good topic, this one. On the 13th of May, our webinar will be about hybrid working. A question we get asked all the time by employers. Even yesterday, I was on site at a client who asked me, you know, should we be working hybrid? So not an easy question to answer because, of course, there's lots of pros and cons. And does it or doesn't it fit in with your organizational structure and your ethos and everything else? So we're going to be taking a real deep dive on this next month, talking about, you know, pros and cons. How is it perceived in the real world? What are candidates and job seekers looking for from employers? And yeah, where could you, or really not where, but what is the answer for your business? Okay, so please join us for that. That's already available. The link's up on the website. I'll send that link out as well with the brief survey that we'll be sending out later on this afternoon. So hopefully that's been of use to you. I'm happy to open the floor to any questions. We've got 1 or 2 minutes before we finish. So I'm just going to stop sharing that now. And you should be able to enable your own microphones, but if you do have a question, just put up your virtual hand and we'll come around and answer. So if you have any questions, fire away.
Just to let you know, Stuart, Natalie Dunkley had a really good question actually, which was going back to the slide around X interviews.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure if Natalie wants to sort of ask the question to you directly, if she's able to or not, or I can sort of chat through some of the things that were put into the chat box.
Yeah. Equally, Natalie, if you prefer a one-to-one chat, then yeah.
No, it's fine.
Appreciate some of these things are sometimes difficult to chat about in an open forum. So obviously, yeah, more than happy to contact you afterwards. That's fine.
Fine. I think that Natalie's just put in the chat, she can't. She's in an open plan office. But essentially, Stuart, the question was, does having an exit interview open up issues if complaints are raised during this process? So, for example, an employee may raise a grievance that hasn't came up previously and doesn't really give an opportunity to address the points as they are leaving. I can see doing an exit interview might be good if an employee has a positive suggestions, but it can also, how can it also be used in a way that sort of doesn't always cause difficulties from a HR standpoint? So I guess if grievances are raised, then you're going to have to start looking into see either their credibility or if it's just exit frustration, and I guess that can sort of create some more HR responsibilities and sort of work at that point.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I suppose if you think of it about, if you imagine an exit interview as a chance for somebody to review their time with your business, I would take the same approach. Okay. So yes, everybody likes positive feedback. Everybody likes good reviews. We have 5-star reviews on Google for happy clients. What do you do if someone gives you a 1-star review? And that would be a similar situation. So you've only just discovered the real reason why somebody's handed in their notice or is leaving. And as you said, it's possibly too late to stop that particular exit. Okay. But what do you do with bad news? Well, I personally would welcome the opportunity to hear it, because without that news, you can't possibly address anything. And even if that's that individual's own experience, that doesn't mean that others are also experiencing something similar within the organization. And it might be a good opportunity to stop a run of resignations in a department. So yes, it might be too late for one, but far better to catch it than have numbers of people leaving for similar reasons. So I would certainly want to hear that feedback. And again, as I said earlier, they might not feel comfortable about giving it to someone directly in the business. So it might be an opportunity at that point to say, okay, well, would you feel comfortable talking to a sort of a third party HR professional for us, who will probably get a lot more of the sort of truth out of that person than certainly if they were interviewed by somebody who's already within the business and that works with them day to day. So I suppose to answer the question, yes, I would want to have that feedback. And ultimately, if that enables you to address problems within the business, then that could prevent a bigger problem further down the tracks. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Yes, it has. Natalie's just put a little note into the chat. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much. Any other questions while we've got you for another minute or two? Anybody else?
No, the only other thing was about sending over the job descriptions webinar to Rachel afterwards. That was one of the things just to do.
Yep, no problem at all. There was another question I think there flashed up.
Yeah, Natalie just mentioned it. So from a GDPR point of view, what's a reasonable amount of time to keep their details on database? My initial thoughts on that, Natalie, would be keep it in line with most personnel files, which is typically 6 years. Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, that's good advice. There's also you will have your own privacy policy as a company. And in that privacy policy, there will be clauses about how and when and how long you store personal data for. So I would just refer back to your privacy policy and follow whatever guidelines you've got in place, because that pretty much covers everything from, customer data, staff data, you name it. So yeah, I would refer back to that. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're going to draw a close there. So thank you very much again for attending. I'll send out a brief survey later on this afternoon, so if you could please take 10 seconds just to answer that. It just helps us to create and manage, make sure that we're producing good content for future webinars. And yeah, please book yourselves onto next month's webinar all about hybrid working. That should be a really fascinating chat. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.